What's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Clockwolf. Oh! And welcome to my review of Titan Souls, an action-adventure game published by Devolver Digital and developed by Acid Nerve, that was released on April 14th, 2015. The following review will show very few spoilers for the game, as well as some light visual and plot spoilers for Shadow of the Colossus. Given that, Titan Souls is a very simplistic game with minimal story. So besides having some of the boss fights spoiled for you, you won't be missing out on much by watching this video. But discovering, fighting, and learning how to defeat each of the bosses is one of the best parts of playing this game, so I won't be showing too much footage from any of the boss battles outside of the first few. At the start of the game, in the opening logos, you get a message that the game is best played with a controller because it's easier to aim with the joysticks rather than with a mouse. I went ahead and used a controller, but seeing as how this game only uses 3 buttons, I don't see how using a mouse and keyboard would make that much of a difference. The opening of the game shows you its basic premise in possibly the best way it can. An image of your character, a bow, and an arrow. There are no other weapons you can get, and you'll only be given 1 arrow. You can't upgrade the bow, and you can't find more arrows. The equipment that you get at the start is what you'll be using throughout the whole game. The beginning has the player performing a very simple tutorial that shows off the character's only 4 actions. You can press a button to roll and hold down the button to turn that roll into a run when the animation finishes playing out. You can press another button to fire your arrow, and you press and hold down that same button to bring the arrow back. The arrow will never break, and besides getting it stuck on something in the environment when you try to pull it back, you'll never lose it. Next, the game will show you its checkpoint system. Step on these symbols on the floor and they'll light up to save your progress. There are several of these checkpoints scattered around the map. The small circles on the sides of the symbol are markers. These markers allow the checkpoints to act as a sort of compass. If the marker is dark, then there's an enemy to fight in that direction, and if it's lit up, then you've already beaten that enemy. Although I will say it's not always that precise. The thing that the markers are pointing at isn't always a straight shot from where they're placed. As an example, sometimes the marker will be pointing west, and the thing that it's meant to be pointing at will be more northwest. It's really not that specific, and it doesn't seem as though it's meant to be. Those markers seem to be there primarily to give the player a general idea of their surroundings. The first boss fight players will likely encounter is a big ball of slime with a heart in it. As you might think, you need to destroy the heart to kill the Titan by avoiding its attacks and shooting its weak spot when it's exposed. It only takes 1 hit to its weak spot to kill a Titan, but you die in 1 hit as well. This is how all the boss battles will play out. The whole game will involve you going around the game's map and fighting 19 Titans in one-on-one boss battles, by dodging their attack and then shooting their weak point with your bow and arrow. Each boss battle is broken up by trekking across the map to the next one. This all may sound familiar to some people. Some of the reviews for this game say that Titan Souls is a combination of Dark Souls, The Legend of Zelda, and Shadow of the Colossus. While the Dark Souls elements in this game seem to mostly be superficial, there are some aesthetical elements taken from The Legend of Zelda, and notes were clearly taken from Shadow of the Colossus. At the time of making this video, I've never played any of the Dark Souls games, but I've seen enough Dark Souls gameplay to know that the one-hit kill approach of this game, combined with the lack of a stamina system, pretty much kills any comparisons of Titan Souls and Dark Souls. The best reason I could surmise as to why people are comparing this game to Dark Souls is because it fits the connotation of the Souls genre, or Souls-like games, which is a tag that I have mixed feelings on. As best as I can tell, Souls-like games are games with a concept similar to Dark Souls, as in a game where the player overcomes a seemingly insurmountable obstacle by learning how through trial and error. The player is expected to intuitively fail over and over and over again, but each failure gives the player knowledge that allows them to get closer to success. I suppose Titan Souls does fit into that broad description. Each boss will look aesthetically different and will play at least slightly different from each other as well. So you'll need to memorize the attack patterns of each Titan to learn what to do and what not to do. In doing this, you will likely die multiple times. The funny thing is, Dark Souls didn't even coin this as a concept. Demon Souls did. Dark Souls just popularized it. As for the comparisons to Zelda, I haven't played every Zelda game. In fact, I think I've only ever played 5, that being Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, and Hyrule Warriors, which is more of a spin-off than a mainline entry. But I can see the Zelda influences in some areas, be it that they're mostly aesthetical. The Titans do look like bosses you would find in a Zelda game, as do the different environments you'll be traversing. Titan Souls even has its own version of the Lost Woods from Ocarina of Time. The player character kinda looks like Link, but I don't think The Legend of Zelda can take credit for inventing the concept of an androgynous-looking hero character with no name and a bow going around and slaying monsters. That's where the comparison's in for me, but there may be things that I'm overlooking. There aren't any dungeons to explore or quests to be given out to the player, and the pixel art style reminds me more of Fez than any Zelda game I've seen. As for Shadow of the Colossus, yes, I've played it, and I can say without a doubt that the inspirations from that game are blindingly obvious. Both games are structured in the same way, and they have the exact same overarching gameplay premise. A nameless character wandering around a large open map looking for giants to fight. You kill the giant by attacking its weak spot, and after it's dead, you absorb its soul energy into your body. Then you move on to the next giant. Do this over a dozen times until the game's over. There are no smaller enemies to fight. Both games are a long series of boss fights, one after the other, only broken up by walking across the map to the next one. That is assuming that the boss battles in Shadow of the Colossus and Titan Souls can even be called boss battles at all, because there's technically nothing to compare them to, but that's more of an issue of semantics. There's a Titan in the game called Serpent of the Cold Depths, which is pretty much a copy-paste of the 7th Colossus named Hydrus, and there's also literally an achievement in the game called Shadow of the Colossus. This game wears its inspirations on its sleeve. I think I saw 1 or 2 other references to other things in this game as well. I would rather sit here and talk about all the things that Titan Souls does differently than Shadow of the Colossus, but sadly there's not a lot this game tries to do differently. It instead very much establishes itself as a fan game more than anything, and while this was an admirable attempt, it just doesn't quite live up to its contemporary. The reason being has to do with 3 main things: sense of scale, world building, and character motivation. When you face against one of the Colossus, the camera pulls down to the player character's feet, showing off the scale of the creature, and some of the Colossi are comparatively smaller than others, making the larger ones seem much bigger. In Titan Souls, the camera is always in the same position, making the sense of scale feel the same for each boss fight. Shadow of the Colossus also has some very subtle world building within the details of its environments. In Titan Souls, the closest thing the game does to subtle world building through environmental storytelling is a single Titan that can't fight back and will actually talk to the player, as well as some carvings on the walls that are just map directions to help locate the next boss fight. The 3 most important characters in Shadows are the player character named Wander, your horse Agro, and Mono, the mysterious girl that Wander is trying to save. In Shadow of the Colossus, Wander makes a deal with a mysterious spirit called Dorman that if he goes out and slays 16 Colossi throughout the valley that they're in, he'll bring back Mono from the dead. Wander accepts, goes out, fights and slays all of these Colossi, and each time he does, some spirit energy goes into his body. Each time this happens, the Wanderer looks more and more sickly looking. It's obvious that the whole experience is taking a toll on him. The player never learns the specifics of the relationship between Mono and Wander. All they really know is that Wander really cares about her, enough to risk his life and even sacrifice his body to save her. This makes it extremely easy to root for Wander despite the fact that we don't know the whole story. The player's relationship with their horse Agro grows as they progress through the game. He's your primary source of transportation throughout the valley and helps you out in several boss fights. Point being, the player character isn't just picking fights with giants because he feels like it. He's actually trying to save someone's life and has his horse companion to help him along the way. In Titan Souls, you have no idea why your character is fighting these giants, so it's harder to root for them. You may think that it's unfair to try and compare an indie game that was developed by 3 first-time devs to the work of Team Ico, and you would be right. This is exactly the problem. When writing the script for this video, I was conflicted on how I should proceed. At first, I thought that I should judge the game entirely as its own thing without even bringing up any other games. But because of the fact that Titan Souls is first and foremost a fan fan game. If I were to do so, I would run the risk of sounding ill-informed at best and disingenuous at worst. Then I thought about making this a video about comparing Titan Souls to Shadow of the Colossus, but I scrapped that idea because there doesn't really seem to be anything the two games have in common that Shadow of the Colossus doesn't do better. It's the more unique elements of Titan Souls that I think are what deserve more attention, which is the real tragedy here. Titan Souls' concept is an interesting idea all by itself without needing to copy another game so hard. The idea of boss fights that revolve around timing your dodges and waiting for the perfect shot at the only weak point with your only arrow is a neat idea, and I wish that the developers focused more time on that rather than trying to emulate Fumito Ueda's work. As for the game's more unique ideas, they have their own problems, primarily centering around the way aiming with the bow works. You can't just tap the button to shoot the arrow, so you'll need to hold the fire button down for at least a second before firing, which is a bizarre choice given how there's a relation between your charging time and how far the arrow travels. But it's not very clear, and the game doesn't have a charge meter or give you a way to guarantee that the shot won't be too weak. It's also difficult to tell in which direction you're going to shoot the arrow. This is because the game doesn't have an aiming reticle, the player character is very far away from the camera, and the character model only has 8 facing directions because of their pixelated design. This becomes a problem for Titans that either have very short time windows to hit their weak spots, or have very small weak spots, or both. There's no way to do short quick volleys with your bow and arrow using a single quick button press, which is odd. Especially given how the game seems to be designed with speedrunning in mind. A game that relies on precisely timing your movements in short time windows should never have such a clumsy control scheme. In Shadow of the Colossus, the boss fights are tedious, but they feel fair. You do a lot of climbing, and the game gives you a grip meter that tells you how long you have before you fall. You can hunt white-tailed lizards to increase Wander's grip meter, and there are areas on the Colossi themselves where the player can get some respite and replenish their stamina. In other words, thanks to the grip meter, the hurdle that the player is supposed to overcome to get to their goal of defeating each boss is something that they can physically see. This gives the player the knowledge and therefore the power to adjust their priorities accordingly between and during each boss fight. This is something that Titan Souls is severely missing. A charging meter for the bow or something that will allow the player to know if they should fire or not. As it stands, it's all guesswork. Asking your players to factor in things like, is my character facing the right way? Did I hold down the button long enough? Am I aiming at the weak spot or am I slightly off? Is counterintuitive for a game that has you fighting enemies that have their weak points exposed for such a small amount of time before you have to start dodging their attacks again. Some of the Titans have their weak spots exposed for a total of 1 or 2 seconds. Each Titan is distinct from one another in appearance, attack patterns, movements, and difficulty. You can learn when the best time to fire your bow is by memorizing all of these things through trial and error, but because of the clunky mechanics interfering with your ability to line up the shot, as far as having your arrow actually hit the target goes, half the time it feels like you just got lucky. This luck does have its own moments. Like for instance, in this game's Lost Forest area, I found a giant mushroom boss, and I killed it within the first 10 seconds of me finding it. Being able to quickly kill bosses like this through luck feels great, but these moments will be few and far between for most players. It's still possible though, and there's even an in-game achievement for beating the game in 20 minutes if that sounds like your jam. Which segues me into another problem, which is length and replayability. Titan Souls' average playtime is about 3 to 6 hours, and there's very little replay value. Because of the Souls-like nature of the game, half of the enjoyment is figuring out the bosses and learning their patterns. But that's only fun the first time you fight them. Because of the unreliable controls, there's no reliable way for the player to improve their skills no matter how many times they replay the game. So most players probably won't even bother trying. Not unless you want to start a new game and try to die less while beating it, or try to do a speed run. The game has a total of 20 Titans. The footage I showed in this video was from 6 of them. One of the Titans is a reskin of another Titan that's harder to beat and can only be found when replaying the game in hard mode. 3 more are the game's final bosses. Without spoiling anything, the first one, named Guardian of the Eternal Gate, is probably my favorite one because it takes every idea from every Titan in the game and puts them all in one place. You need to memorize different attack patterns, dodge at the right moments, and time your shot just right. There's a lot to factor in all at once in terms of getting to the weak point, so I had the most amount of fun with that boss fight. The second final boss fight is called the Soul, and I found this boss fight to be slightly disappointing even though I see what they were going for. Most of my disappointment comes from the fact that the best way to beat this boss is by using a tactic that I think was supposed to seem clever, but it's not communicated properly, so most players probably won't understand what it is they're supposed to do. Then there's the final boss of the game called Truth that you can only fight if you beat all the other Titans in the game. It's essentially the Gate of Truth from the anime Full Metal Alchemist. For beating the game and all the Titans, including the final bosses, you unlock a few difficulty buffs that you can use in a new save to make the game harder, including hard mode where the bosses have more frantic attack patterns and even smaller time windows to hit their weak spots. There's also an Iron Man mode and a no running and dodging mode. You can turn on any one of these new difficulty buffs when starting a new save, or all of them at once if you're a masochist. And that's Titan Souls. I know I didn't talk about much, but as I said, it's a very small and simple game. I did enjoy what the game tried to do with the boss fights in spite of its clunky control scheme. If you're someone who really likes the Shadow of the Colossus game design formula, or if you're someone who's a fan of Souls-like games, then this is one worth picking up. I normally enjoy action games where everything dies in one hit when they're done right. It is a fun game, but the asking price is a little steep for such a short experience IMO, so maybe wait for it to go on sale. I really wish that this game had fleshed out its own original ideas more than it did, but it seems as though it's more content to live within the shadow of another shadow. Hey, what's up? It's me. Of course it's me, who the hell else sounds like this? Anyway, you might be wondering from my last video where the video that I said that I was gonna make there is here. You're actually probably not wondering that because none of that made any sense. Okay, so in my last video, in my gunpoint review video, I said I was gonna do a puzzle game involving sound. Yeah, that got pushed back. Sorry, I might go into detail and explain more about why if I ever get around to making it. But for now, yeah, it got pushed back. Sorry! But I finally managed to get a video out, so, you know, I'm happy about that. Oh, and the good news is, I already know what I'm going to review next. I was hoping to have this video out by the end of August, but that didn't work out because I have been really glued to this one game that I'm going to talk about in my next review. I'm not gonna spoil it, but let's just say I hope y'all got valid passports. I'm not gonna give an ETA because I'm starting to realize that I'm actually really bad at those. So, yeah, the video will be out when it comes out, hopefully sooner rather than later, and I will see you all then when that happens. Anyway, thank you all for watching! Oh! If you like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video.